How do you beat an enemy jet that climbs higher, carries heavier guns, and is flown by men who were never supposed to be there? That was the question over Northwest Korea. Not on paper, in the sky, along the Yalu River, where North Korea met Manchuria, the air war narrowed into one dangerous corridor. American pilots gave it a name, MiG Alley. And for Chinese and North Korean forces, MiG Alley was supposed to be a shield, a place where communist jets could rise from protected bases, strike fast, and make American air power pay for every mile. Then the F-86 Sabre arrived, and the equation changed, because the enemy was not facing some desperate stopgap fighter. The United States had brought a swept-wing jet built for the same new age of speed as the MiG-15, and the enemy was not only Chinese or North Korean either. Behind the markings, behind the secrecy, behind the radio silence, Soviet pilots were flying those MiGs, veterans, trained men, some with World War II experience. They were supposed to tilt the balance. Instead, they found themselves facing something they had not expected, not just an airplane, a system, a radar gunsight that could solve a firing problem in seconds, a G-suit that helped an American pilot keep fighting through punishing turns, a jet that stayed steadier in the dive, and a pilot force that the United States kept loaded with experience. The MiG-15 was a very good machine. That is what makes the story matter. The Sabre did not win because the other jet was junk. It won because American engineering, tactics, training, and cockpit equipment turned a narrow contest into a real advantage. And when the Soviet veterans began rotating out, replaced by less experienced Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean pilots, the bottom fell out. That was the uncomfortable truth in MiG Alley. The enemy had a fine jet, they had secret Soviet help, they had numbers growing along the Yalu, and still the Sabre kept coming. The first escalation began in late 1950. The Korean War had already turned into a contest of speed, logistics, and air control. Then, in October, Joseph Stalin agreed to send Soviet MiG-15 fighters to provide air cover for Chinese troops entering North Korea. The first MiG-15 patrols followed in November, but they did not arrive openly. That was the first twist. The Soviet Union was in the war, but it was not supposed to look that way. The aircraft wore Chinese or North Korean markings. Soviet pilots received communist documents and uniforms. They were ordered not to approach the front line. They were ordered not to fly over the sea. The reason was simple. If they were shot down and captured, the secret could break open. Even their voices were treated like evidence. Soviet pilots were forbidden to speak Russian over the radio. They carried boards with common Korean phrases written phonetically in Cyrillic. Imagine that. A jet fight at near transonic speed, a split-second turning battle, and a pilot is supposed to read from a phrase board in a language he does not speak. In practice, it was impossible. After the first combats, that rule was relaxed, but the secrecy remained. The Soviet air effort was organized under the 64th Fighter Aviation Corps, the 64th IAK, commanded by General Georgy Lobov. Its units were based in Manchuria. Around the Yalu, roughly 70,000 Soviet personnel served in support roles like radar, anti-aircraft defense, and interception control. This was not just a few mystery pilots. This was a hidden structure. American intelligence recognized individual Soviet pilots early, but it did not fully grasp the scale of entire Soviet regiments and divisions operating there. Stalin wanted precautions, no captured personnel, no public proof, no open Soviet war with the United States. So the MiGs fought under a mask, and the mask had limits. Soviet regiments were ordered to stay over communist-controlled areas. They were forbidden to fly over the Yellow Sea. That meant they could threaten American aircraft near the Yalu. But they also had boundaries, lines they were not supposed to cross. This mattered, because air combat is not only about speed and climb, it is about freedom. Freedom to pursue, freedom to extend, freedom to choose when and where to fight. The Soviet pilots had skill, the MiG had performance, but the rules around them narrowed the fight. Still, the MiG-15 was a serious shock. It was not a crude aircraft, it was not a second-rate machine. Both the MiG-15 and the F-86 Sabre inherited a 35-degree swept wing from German aerodynamic research of the Second World War. Both were part of the first large-scale jet versus jet air war in history. The Sabre itself had been rushed to the Far East in December 1950. 3 squadrons were sent quickly. The West needed a swept-wing fighter that could match the MiG-15's speed envelope. That is how urgent the problem was. The MiG had changed the air war. The Sabre had to change it back, and when the two jets met, the contest was close enough to make both sides pay attention. The MiG-15 bis had clear strengths. It had heavier cannon armament, 2 23mm NR-23 cannon, 1 37mm N-37 cannon. That was serious firepower, especially against bombers. It had a better rate of climb, better acceleration, a higher combat ceiling. At about 20,000 feet, it had better level speed. Its ceiling was about 50,800 feet, compared with about 47,200 feet for the F-86A. At high altitude, the MiG-15 bis could hold advantages over the F-86E. It could climb faster. It had a higher ceiling. It could turn better in that thin air. So if you were a Chinese or North Korean commander watching MiGs rise over the Yalu, you had reasons to believe. The jet looked like the answer. And if you were a Soviet veteran in that cockpit, you had reasons to be confident. Many Soviet pilots came from a force that had fought the Luftwaffe in World War II. Soviet recruitment for Korea prioritized veterans, with a preference for men under 27. Youth, experience, a capable machine, a hidden support network. On paper, that should have been enough, but the sky is not paper, and the Sabre had its own answer. It began with a tool that changed the last few seconds of a fight, the radar gunsight. The F-86E and later F-86A5 aircraft received the A1CM gunsight tied to the AN/APG-30 radar. That sounds technical. It was more than technical. It was the difference between guessing and computing. The APG-30 could automatically calculate target range. It was accurate out to roughly 3,000 feet. It could compute lead even when the target was maneuvering. In jet combat, that mattered enormously. Everything happened faster than in the propeller age. Closure rates were higher. Angles changed faster. A pilot might have only a moment to fire. A human eye could misjudge distance. A human hand could pull the sight across the target and still be late. But the Sabre gave its pilot help. The radar gunsight fed him a solution. Not magic, not a guarantee, but a real advantage. The MiG carried heavier cannon. The Sabre carried 6.50 caliber, 12.7mm M3 Browning machine guns. Their rate of fire was high, and with the radar gunsight, those guns became much more effective in deflection shooting. That phrase sounds dry. Deflection shooting, but it is the heart of fighter combat. You are not shooting where the enemy is. You are shooting where he will be. In a turning jet fight, that prediction is hard. At high speed, it is brutal. The Sabre's gunsight helped solve it, and the Soviets noticed. In October 1951, they recovered a downed Sabre. Their conclusion was telling. They judged that the Sabre's combat advantage came from the APG-30 radar gunsight, which made accurate fire at longer distances easier. Think about that. The enemy examined the American fighter, and the thing that stood out was not just speed, not just wing shape, not just engine performance. It was the cockpit system that helped the pilot turn a fleeting opportunity into a hit. The astonishment was not theatrical, it was technical. The Soviet side found a machine that made American marksmanship more dangerous, and that is exactly the kind of advantage that wins close fights. Because the MiG was good enough to get into the contest, The Sabre was better equipped to finish it. Then came the second cockpit advantage, the G-suit. The F-86 gave its pilot anti-G protection. The MiG-15 did not. This sounds simple. It was not. In a hard turn, blood wants to leave the pilot's brain. The world can narrow, vision can dim, the body can fail before the aircraft does. A G-suit helps resist that. It helps the pilot remain conscious and functional under high G. That meant an American Sabre pilot could keep fighting through maneuvers that placed real strain on the body. Not because he was braver, not because the other pilot lacked courage, because the equipment helped him stay in the fight. That is the American advantage at its best, not one heroic myth. A practical system, a pilot, a jet, a gunsight, a suit, training to use all of it. And when the fight moved lower, below about 30,000 feet, the Sabre had another edge. It was more maneuverable there. It could dive faster. It was more aerodynamically stable. It could get close to Mach 1 in a dive without the severe control reversal that troubled the MiG-15 at high indicated speeds. That was critical. The MiG liked altitude. It climbed hard. It could operate high. But if a Sabre pilot could pull the fight downward, or use a dive to escape or reposition, he could bring the contest into his aircraft's stronger territory. Again, this was not one magic trait. It was a combination. At high altitude, the MiG could be frightening. At lower altitude, the Sabre came alive. In the dive, the Sabre gave its pilot trust. Trust matters. A pilot who trusts his controls can push the aircraft. A pilot who fears instability must hold back. In MiG Alley, that difference could decide the final seconds. Now add the human factor. This is where the third escalation begins, because the story is often told as a machine contest. Sabre versus MiG. American jet versus Soviet jet. Swept wing against swept wing. But the real contest was deeper. The United States concentrated experienced pilots in the F-86 force. During the Korean War, 41 American aces emerged, and all but one flew the F-86. That concentration mattered. A good aircraft becomes better in trained hands. A radar gunsight becomes more deadly when the pilot knows how to use it. A G-suit helps most when the pilot knows how to manage the fight. And in MiG Alley, experience was not evenly distributed. The Soviet Union rotated no fewer than 12 divisions through Korea during the war, in part to train pilots. Only a handful of the truly great wartime aces actually went to Korea. At first, the Soviet presence brought dangerous men into the MiG, veterans, disciplined pilots, men with combat experience. Against them, the Sabre's margin was narrow. Modern studies suggest the real ratio against Soviet-flown MiGs may have been around 1.3 to 1, maybe 1.4 to 1 in that narrow band. Not a wipeout, not a simple story, a hard professional contest. And that makes the American result more impressive, not less. Because the Sabre was not crushing a helpless enemy. It was edging out skilled Soviet pilots in a jet that had real advantages. But as veterans rotated out, quality changed. Newer Soviet pilots came in. Chinese and North Korean pilots flew more of the missions. The average level declined. And then the Sabre's system advantage widened dramatically. Against less experienced Chinese and North Korean pilots, the American advantage was described in secondary sources as enormous, with figures around 12 to 1 appearing as a trend, not a precise number. The number itself must be treated carefully, both sides overclaimed, but the direction is clear. When the MiG was flown by elite Soviet veterans, the fight was close. When it was flown by newer pilots, the Sabre's combination of equipment, training and tactics became punishing. This is the center of the story. The Soviet pilots secretly flying MiGs still lost because secrecy did not solve the tactical equation. It did not give them a radar gun sight like the Sabres. It did not give them a G-suit. It did not remove high-speed control problems. It did not free them from operational restrictions. And it did not let them keep their best veterans in the fight forever. By September 1951, Around 525 MiG-15As operated in the Yalu area. That is a large presence. The enemy had numbers. The enemy had bases across the border. The enemy had radar and interception control support. The enemy had a jet that could climb high and strike hard. Yet American Sabres continued to challenge them in MiG Alley. Not blindly, not recklessly, with tactics built around the Sabre's strengths. Bring the fight where the Sabre handled better. Use the dive. Trust the stability. Use the gun sight. Keep the pilot conscious and effective through hard maneuvering. And above all, put experienced pilots in the cockpit. That is how a narrow engineering race becomes an operational advantage. The official numbers have changed over time. At first, the United States credited 792 MiGs, destroyed for 78 Sabres lost in air-to-air combat. That was the famous 10-to-1 claim. It became part of the legend, but later analysis cut it down. The USAF investigation called Sabre Measure Charlie reduced the ratio by about half, to roughly 5-to-1. Internally, the Air Force accepted about 200 MiGs shot down. More recent RAND work suggests an overall real ratio around 1.8-to-1, and probably about 1.3-to-1 against Soviet-flown MiGs. Those numbers are humbler. They are also more useful, because they show the truth without the fog. The Sabre did not need a mythic 10-to-1 score to prove American superiority. The real story is stronger. Against good Soviet pilots in a very good MiG, the F-86 still held an edge, a narrow edge, a hard-earned edge, an edge built by engineers, instructors, mechanics, and pilots. Then, when the enemy cockpit filled with less experienced Chinese, North Korean, and newer Soviet pilots, that edge expanded. The Soviet side had its own claims. The 64th Fighter Aviation Corps claimed a 3.4-to-1 ratio in its favor, and 1,097 enemy aircraft of all types destroyed. That claim is contested. As with American claims, historians treat it with caution. In jet combat, everyone saw flashes, everyone counted smoke, everyone came home believing they had done more than could later be proven. So the honest picture is not propaganda versus propaganda. It is a careful balance. The MiG-15 was never simply outclassed in raw performance. The F-86 won in practice because it fused machine and man better. Radar gun sight, G-suit, high-speed stability, control in the dive, pilot quality, tactical freedom. That is the difference. And it is exactly the kind of difference that America has often known how to build. Not always the biggest gun, not always the highest ceiling, but a whole system that helps the pilot make better decisions under pressure. In MiG Alley, seconds mattered. A Sabre pilot might spot a MiG above him. The MiG could climb. It could use altitude. It could carry heavy cannon that were dangerous if brought to bear. The American pilot could not pretend the MiG was weak. He had to respect it. But he did not have to fear it, because he knew his own aircraft. Below 30,000 feet, the Sabre gave him better maneuverability. In the dive, it gave him control. In a hard turn, the G-suit helped him stay in the fight. When the shot came, the radar gun sight helped him judge range and lead. That is a quiet kind of confidence. The kind that comes not from slogans, but from cockpit reality. For Chinese and North Korean forces, the presence of MiGs was meant to be a warning. The sky near the Yalu was contested now. American aircraft would have to face jets, but the Sabre turned that warning back on them. Every time an F-86 patrol entered MiG Alley, it challenged the idea that communist air power could seal the northwest sky. Every time Soviet pilots had to hide their identity, they were reminded of another truth. They were fighting a war they could not admit. The Americans, by contrast, were flying under their own name. Their aircraft carried the visible burden of an open fight, and in that open fight, the Sabre made the secret harder to protect. The Soviet rules were designed to avoid capture. Do not go near the front. Do not fly over the sea. Stay over communist territory. Do not expose the truth. but fighter combat is built on pursuit. If you cannot pursue freely, you give up options. If you cannot range widely, your enemy can learn your boundaries. If your best pilots rotate out, the enemy can feel the change. And the Sabre pilots did. The contest evolved. At first, Soviet veterans made the MiG deadly. Later, as the mix changed, the American advantage became more visible, not because the MiG stopped being fast, not because its cannon became lighter, not because its ceiling fell, because the man-machine balance shifted. The United States kept experienced men in Sabres. The Soviet system spread experience through rotation. Training more pilots has value, but in a combat theater, it can lower the average quality in the cockpit. That mattered over Korea. It meant that the same MiG-15 could be a deadly opponent one day and a vulnerable one another day, depending on who was flying it. The Sabre pilots understood that better than anyone. They knew the airplane mattered. They knew the pilot mattered more. And they knew the equipment around the pilot could tip the scale. There is a reason the recovered Sabre made such an impression on Soviet evaluators in 1951. The APG-30 gunsight was not glamorous. It did not roar like an engine. It did not show itself like a swept wing. But it turned geometry into fire control. It helped turn a moving target into a solvable problem. That is engineering superiority, not a boast, a mechanism. The enemy could admire the MiG's climb. They could trust its high-altitude performance. They could rely on its heavy cannon. But when the fight compressed into a few seconds of deflection shooting, the Sabre pilot had help the MiG pilot did not. And the G-suit added another layer. A pilot is not separate from the aircraft. He is part of the aircraft's performance. If he blacks out, the airplane's theoretical advantages mean nothing. If he loses vision, the guns mean nothing. If his body reaches its limit before the fight is over, the enemy gets the next move. The F-86 addressed that. It protected the pilot as part of the weapons system. That is a very American insight. The machine serves the man. The cockpit is not an afterthought. The pilot's body is a battlefield too. Keep him awake, keep him aware, give him the range, give him the lead, give him stable controls, then let his training work. This is why the Sabre story still carries pride. Not because the enemy was weak, because the enemy was strong enough to make the victory meaningful. The MiG-15 bis could climb higher than the F-86A. It could accelerate better. It had a higher ceiling. It had heavy cannon. At high altitude, it could be superior in key performance areas, and Soviet veterans knew how to fight. Still, they met an American aircraft that had been rushed into theater and then used with discipline. 3 F-86 squadrons went to the Far East in December 1950 because the situation demanded it. The United States responded, fast, with the West's first swept-wing fighter, designed to match the MiG's speed envelope. That is not luck. That is industrial readiness meeting tactical urgency. The Sabre changed the air equation because it gave American pilots a fighter that could stay in the fight with the MiG. Then American systems gave them the edge, not overwhelming at first, but real. And in combat, real is enough. The closer you look, the more the old simple myths fall away. The Sabre was not perfect. The MiG was not helpless. The Soviet pilots were not amateurs. The claimed kill ratios were inflated by the fog of war, but the result remains. The F-86 became the defining American jet fighter of Korea. It produced nearly every American ace of the war. It forced secretly deployed Soviet pilots to confront American technology and training directly. It showed Chinese and North Korean forces that a jet shield along the Yalu could be challenged. And it proved that in the jet age, the winner would not be the side with one superior number on a chart. The winner would be the side that integrated the aircraft, the pilot, and the fight. The final proof came after the shooting stopped. Operation Moolah began in 1953. Between April 26th and May 18th, the USAF dropped about 1.33 million leaflets from B-29S. They were printed in Russian, Chinese, and Korean. The offer was simple. Bring an operational MiG-15 to South Korea, receive $50,000, be the first, and receive another $50,000, a total of $100,000. On September 21, 1953, North Korean Lieutenant No Kum-sok landed a MiG-15 bis at Kimpo Air Base. The aircraft was marked Red 2057. He did not know about Operation Moolah when he defected, but the result was the same. The United States finally had an operational MiG to test, and the tests confirmed what combat had suggested. The MiG was fast, it was dangerous, it had real strengths, but it also had problems: oscillation, pressurization issues, pitch-up instability at high speed, a dangerous fuel pump. The captured aircraft reinforced a recurring lesson from pilots and testers. The more experienced pilot usually wins, no matter what he is flying. That line is cockpit wisdom, not a clean official formula. But Korea gave it weight, because the Sabre's victory was never just aluminum and steel. It was training, it was judgment, it was how to enter a fight, when to turn, when to dive, when to fire, when to refuse the enemy's best altitude, when to force him into yours. The F-86 Sabre won because America did the complete job. It did not merely build a jet, it built a fighting system around the pilot, and the enemy had to face it. Secret Soviet pilots came into Korea behind false markings. Chinese and North Korean forces counted on the MiG-15 to contest the sky. The MiG climbed higher, it carried heavier guns, it was flown, at times by skilled veterans, and still, over MiG Alley, the Sabre found the advantage, not by magic, by engineering, by tactics, by training, by giving the American pilot the tools to make the last second count. That is why the secret did not save them, that is why the MiG did not decide the war in the air, and that is why the F-86 Sabre remains, more than a beautiful jet, it is a reminder. In a fair fight, details matter. In a close fight, systems matter. And when America gets the system right, even a hidden enemy in a first-rate machine can be forced to look across the sky and realize he has met something better.